trial. You mean kangaroo court. I've heard about Dramian justice.
Captain, you're becoming emotional.
Of course I am. Bones harming other beings. You know better, Spock. I know better, not Bones.
Bridge to all decks. It is time for a brand new episode of Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Nance.
And I'm Steve Morris. And after giving you an award for making such a great podcast, Scott, I think I've got to put you under arrest. Sorry about that.
Well, you know what? I'm doing the best I can. I think there's a misunderstanding here, and we are going to get to the bottom of this on our deep dive of the animated series episode Albatross. We have, including this episode from the animated series, just 3 episodes left to go, and we will be done with our deep dive of the animated series. Pretty safe to say that while tons of Star Trek podcasts have done their deep dives of the original series, I don't know if anyone has really done the animated series quite in this way, and I'm really proud that we have done this because this is the 50th anniversary of the animated series, which premiered on September 8th, 1973, 7 years to the day when the original series premiered. But enough about that. Steve Morris, what did you think of Albatross?
Mixed, definitely mixed. It's funny. There's some good elements to it that I liked, and then there's some character stuff that doesn't really make a lot of doesn't feel right for the characters, and then there's just some weird stuff in there too that doesn't make sense. So I'm kind of all mixed about it.
I'm mixed as well, but I have to say, after covering the Practical Joker on our previous episode of Enterprise Incidents, I think I was looking for reasons to like this episode, like Albatross, and I found quite a few reasons to like it.
Yeah.
I found one big reason to scratch my head and went, what was that? And I agree with you. For me, it's mixed positive because I have been grading this entire series on a curve, even though when I don't really need to when the episodes are actually really good. But Albatross, the production number for Albatross was 22019, making it the 19th episode of the animated series to go into production. It aired on September 28th, 1974, making it the 99th episode of Star Trek to be broadcast. Was written by Dario Finelli. Do you know who Dario Finelli is, Steve?
I do not.
Me neither. Neither did a number of websites I went to try and figure out who Dario Finelli is. This is Dario Finelli's only known credit next to the 1970 film Scorpio 70. Ever see that, Steve?
It's sitting. I have it in 4K Blu-ray right over here. It's one of my. No, I don't know that the movie.
Me neither. But those are Dario Finelli's only 2 credits, and I gotta say, for just one episode of the animated series, one episode of Star Trek, and nothing else really except this obscure film, Dari did a pretty good job in most cases with this episode. The first draft was submitted on June 19th, 1974. Revised on June 27th, 1974. Overall, I like the episode, and this is definitely going to be an interesting deep dive because there's certainly one element of Albatross that made me think of one particular episode of the original series, and we'll get to that.
So some of the things going on in the world at the time, this aired on September 28th, 1974. Scott, you are a well-known and well-respected expert on release dates for the Beatles. Now, this is not a Beatles release date, but on September 23rd, a Beatle did release a hit single. Do you know what it was?
Okay, so this is 1974. Now, while 1973 was an outstanding year, Steve Morris, for the 4 ex-Beatles, John Lennon had Mind Games, Ringo had his Ringo album, George Harrison had Living in the Material World, and Paul McCartney and Wings had not one, but 2 LPs, long players, released that year. One of them was Red Rose Speedway, and the other ending the year in December of 73 is what I think is Paul's very, very finest album, Band on the Run. But if you're asking me what single by a former Beatle was released around this date, I got to say I'm predicting, and I'm just using dates here, but let's go down to Junior's Farm. I want to lay low.
1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974. 1974 Incorrect, Scott. And I
Oh!
and I do, but the answering the question I didn't ask, the entire history of the Beatles, 1973, and all their releases was very impressive. But it is in fact whatever gets you through the night.
Well, you know what? That was my second guess because whatever gets you through the night was John Lennon's only number one single to be released during his lifetime. And that song was so crucial because, of course, Elton John plays on the album. And Elton John made a bet with John Lennon and said, if this song goes to number one, you have to join me on stage at a live concert. The song did, in
Oh,
fact, go to number one. And John Lennon joined Elton John at one of his concerts where they performed Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which both the Beatles and Elton John recorded. This song, Whatever Gets You Through the Night. And I saw her standing there, which
ooh.
John Lennon introduced as being written by a quote, old fiance of mine named Paul.
So, and again, you did not actually answer the question correctly, but man, talk about a wealth of information. You have fully redeemed yourself. Well done.
There's two things, Steve. It's life comes down to two things for me: Star Trek and the Beatles, and that's it.
You got a few other ones. You got a strong list in there.
Thank you.
On September 25th, it's the first time scientists officially reported that freon gas from aerosol sprays was destroying the ozone layer. And I just want to point out that it's 13 years later that we passed the Montreal Protocol, which outlaws this worldwide, and we solved the problem and it worked. And it just is a sign of actually we can listen to science and we can take action and we can save our planet. Just wanted to point that out.
Very good pointing that out. Yes, it is possible when we all put our heads together.
On the 28th, Nolan Ryan pitched his third no-hitter, which is impressive. And I looked up, because of the news sources I'm looking at, was the number one song on September 28th. And I saw the name and I saw the singer and I went, I don't know what this is. And then I went and I listened to it, and I'm listening to it just assuming like, oh, I probably just don't recognize the title, or I don't recognize the artist name, but I'm sure I'll hear it's a number one song from when I was alive. I'm sure I'll start listen to it. Still don't know what it is. Would you like me to tell you the number one song on September 28th, 1974?
Please do, because obviously I will not guess it right.
It is Rock Me Gently by Andy Kim.
Never heard of Andy Kim. Never heard of Rock Me Gently.
No, I mean, it was just so strange that it's like, no, I literally have never heard of this at all.
Surprised it's like not on like Yacht Rock on Sirius XM.
Or even just like, here's a one-hit wonder. There's lists of those songs that you hear, and which obviously this must be, but yeah, I don't know what it was.
No, I never heard of it.
Shall we jump into the Albatross?
Let's do it.
Would you like to tell us about the star date?
Yes, star date 5275.6. So we are back to my theory, placing this during the fifth year of the voyage of the Starship Enterprise, because the first number is 5, which means that if you place Albatross, if you slot it in to the adventures of the original series, that puts Albatross in between the empath and the Mark of Gideon.
It's interesting that we go from something where there's torture and violence and McCoy is going to sacrifice his life, to something where they're trying to introduce a disease, a plague, if you will, to a society. And this is what happened right in between.
And now, after McCoy sacrificed his life, certainly to save Spock,
Right.
at the end of the empath, now you have Kirk and Spock doing everything to try to save him.
Yep, it makes perfect sense. I think this theory works. And again, we find out that we've just completed our mission, and what we hear is,
We of Dramia wish to thank you and the others of your Federation for your invaluable assistance, Captain Kirk.
We hope through our medical assistance programs to develop and strengthen relations with star systems such as yours, Supreme Prefect.
so we just did some kind of medical thing. Is that correct? That's what just happened?
That's what just happened. First of all, there's two things that first hit me when this episode started. One is that we are seeing the Enterprise at the end of a mission. Like
Yep.
they had this whole adventure. They had this whole thing where they used medical supplies in the remote Dramian star system, which is the furthest star system out that they've been to, and kind of like what they did in Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, where they had to decontaminate a planet. But in this case, it was something very, very similar. So thinking of a couple of things there.
And we're saying goodbye and we're about to beam up. And then right at the last minute, they say,
I have here a warrant for the arrest and trial of one of your party, Captain.
Warrant? Who?
hands him the warrant. Kirk reads it and says,
You are hereby directed to surrender for trial by the people of Dramia, Dr. Leonard McCoy, Medical Officer, USS Enterprise.
Well, that's a shock.
well, it's particularly a shock because, like, it just, and it's not a big point, but it's like, wait, the Enterprise came down, did something medical, obviously supervised by Dr. McCoy, being that he's the chief medical officer. And this is a guy who killed hundreds of people for his bad medical practice, and you let them do it and then only go to arrest him after? It seems like
Excellent
a very
point.
strange plan.
That is definitely a strange plan, and one that I definitely initially went, wait, he just saved these people. Now they didn't have a problem with him saving them, but now they do, and they're going to arrest him now. I agree. That's a bit of a plot point that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Well, and to take it a little bit further, they argue a bit, and the prefect or whatever says, hey, look, it's all the warrant's all in order, and we already cleared this with your Federation. So they called up the Federation to tell them they were going to arrest McCoy. The Federation didn't tell Kirk.
You're right.
It just doesn't make a lot of sense. But what I actually thought, the biggest thought I had was, hey, this actually felt like a classic Star Trek teaser. You know?
Yes, it does. Absolutely, it does. And it also feels like an episode that, especially over the course of 50 minutes versus like 22, could have made a pretty decent live action episode, because there is a lot going on here.
Mm-hmm.
Pacing is pretty good. And maybe part of the problems that you and I have had with the plot points that we have could have been sort of solved if they had more time to really work it through, especially if you have, a veteran like Dorothy Fontana fixing things up as a story editor, but she was already gone by this point with the animated series, so that didn't happen. But I did feel throughout this episode that it would have kind of been decent if it was done as live action.
I think so, with some rewriting. I think, what I think it is like the idea of the episode. McCoy is arrested he was inoculating a planet, and then a whole bunch of people died, and he's discovering that he might be responsible for killing hundreds of people. That's really dramatic. I think the way it's executed in this episode isn't as terribly dramatic. And really, if I just gave you that as a pitch, who would you say is the main character of the pitch I just gave you?
Well, I would say the main character in the pitch is Kirk and Spock.
I would say the main character in the pitch is McCoy, because he's the person who has the emotional story, like that's really emotional. Like, oh my God, I am a doctor and I might be responsible for all these deaths.
Well, the reason I'm going with Spock and McCoy here, especially, or rather Kirk and Spock, is because, McCoy is accused of slaughtering all these people because all the people died on the planet, but it is really Kirk and Spock who are the ones who are driven to save him, to prove his innocence.
Absolutely, yeah.
So just like Wolf in the Fold, a lot of people look at Wolf in the Fold as a Scotty episode, but for most of that episode, Scotty doesn't do much except say, I don't remember, I can't believe this is happening. It is Kirk who is driven to prove Scotty's innocence. Therefore, it's really Kirk's story. Wolf in the Fold is about Kirk, and I think that Albatross is more about Kirk and Spock than it is about McCoy.
I actually think Wolf in the Fold is a really good example of a better version of this idea. And part of it is that you have Scotty around, Is that, by the way, the episode you were thinking of?
Yeah, that is the one.
Yeah. What?
Did you think that too?
Nope, never occurred to me. But now that you say it, I totally get it.
Yeah.
And speaking of Scotty, by the way, I love that when he hears that McCoy's been arrested, he's ready to get some guys and go down.
So I'll bring down, and I'll be down with security. He's like, no, hang on.
So what we find out is that 19 years ago, he was on Dramia II, giving some inoculations, and then this plague hit right after he left that kind of wiped out everyone on this planet. And immediately, Kirk is argumentative.
His trial will tell, Captain.
Trial. You mean kangaroo court? I've heard about Dramian justice.
He's very emotional.
I think he's totally out of character for Kirk. And you know what? Wolf in the Fold is a perfectly good example of him knowing Scotty's innocent, wanting to free him, but also having to follow the rules of the local customs and being polite with the guy who is accusing him. You know,
Well, for the most part, absolutely yes. I mean, he has that conversation with Spock when Spock is on the Enterprise, and he says, "I don't like it any more than you do, but as long as we're here, we have to go along with the customs." But in the very beginning, when all this story is developing and unfolding with Scotty, you see that Kirk does lose his patience and becomes very emotional when he's telling. And he's saying, "Well, well, just get on with the man. Don't just stand there." And the prefect says, "You're behaving someone who will do anything to save his crewmen. Would you do that for Argelius?" So he does get a little emotional in Wolf in the Fold, but he has to put himself back in check. So the fact that he's emotional here as well is another reason why I thought of Wolf in the Fold.
Sure, it makes sense. And I like McCoy's response. He's because Kirk goes,
Bones harming other beings. You know better, Spock. I know better, not Bones.
I wish I could be as sure, Jim. I just don't know. Is it possible that I really did?
He doesn't know, right? And neither does Scotty. I can't remember.
Yeah, no. And the thing is, I think Bones is right. It's like he's a scientist. A thing happened. It's possible he made a mistake. It's possible he didn't understand something about their physiology. And I like the scientist part of McCoy going, no, we have to find out if it's possible this is true,
The termination of your inoculation program and the subsequent outbreak of plague could have been coincidence, Doctor.
Or a tragic mistake on my part.
I do like, again, we have another cool design of a prison that there's sort of a cone that he's in that lights up and turns off. Similar to, what's the episode where it's Uhura, Sulu, and Spock, and they're in the jailer cone or whatever. It's similar to that.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yep. Wait, what episode was that? Hang on a minute.
Yeah, now both of us can't remember the episode. This right here, by the way, is the perfect sign of the difference between the animated series and the original series. There's no episode of the original series that you and I can't name.
Totally.
So we decide, hey, we gotta investigate this on our own, which totally makes sense. I like that Spock, his investigation method brings up a big screen that says plague on Dramia II.
Plague. Dramia II. Of unknown origin, characterized by pigmentation changes in skin of victim, debilitation, death.
But Vulcans are known to have a natural immunity. And I'm like, if it's totally unknown disease, how do you know that Vulcans have an immunity? There's so many things that just don't make sense in this episode.
And Spock says that, Vulcans have an immunity, and you just know that is going to matter in just a few minutes.
I mean, you could just have Spock not get sick and then go, oh, I guess Vulcans have an immunity. You don't have to say it in advance in this case. And then there's just, again, these are just little nitpicks that bug me where he's telling him this and Kirk says, go on, Mr. Spock. And then we cut away. And it's like, why have a character say go on when the guy's
cut away?
It just doesn't, it's just dumb. Back on Dramia, they know that that the Enterprise is going to head off to investigate, so they send a patrol ship to follow him.
They send a patrol ship with just one Dramian on it.
Yeah.
You've got the Enterprise, which has 428 people, and you're going to send a patrol ship with just one Dramian on it. Okay.
Which they detect. And then again, these are just things that don't make a lot of sense. Uhura says, do you want to make contact? Chris says yes, and then says, belay that.
What if he attacks, sir? Why should he? We haven't contacted him, so we must not have detected him. He'd have to explain an attack.
So the logic, if I understand it correctly, is because we didn't call him when we saw him, he will assume that we didn't see him, and then he will have no reason to attack us. I was like, why would he attack you in the first place?
I like that Kirk is being thorough and resourceful and try to outsmart the Dramian ship, but there's nothing subtle about it. Oh, what's this? It's not even that the hangar doors were left open. We're gonna open them to just let this scout ship in. There's nothing subtle about it, and even the dumbest Dramian would be like, "Oh, they're on to me." I mean, this is
On to what? Like, I mean, it just all so bizarre. And then he gets on the ship and he pulls his weapon like he's going to attack him. And they go, first of all, you can't take us on. There's like 400 guys here. We have that.
right.
That's going to stop you. And then they're going to, and he goes, oh, well, I want you to report this to the Federation. They go, we can't. We're out of range, which we set up. And then they say, well, you're a stowaway. And he goes, I've been tricked. And I'm like, I don't really understand anything that just happened.
I know. I don't get it either. This was a very, very weak and obvious plot point that just jumps right at you, and you just go, wait a minute, come on. It's so contrived and doesn't work.
I guess the idea is that for some reason in the Dramian rules and culture that Kirk is not allowed to do any investigation on his own. Is that sort of the deal? And that's what they're resisting against?
I guess so. I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And so they're trying to create all this tension around a thing that I don't think it's like Kirk said, again, to use Wolf in the Fold. In Wolf in the Fold, they give plenty of room for Kirk to come up with a defense and to investigate. You could have been doing the same thing. Like, hey, look, we understand your customs. We understand that you have reasons to arrest McCoy. Can we do some investigation on their own? And they go, all right, we'll let you do it, but you have to take Demos with you.
Right. There you go. Sure. That
and then we're in the same place without all this weird stuff.
Right.
Okay. But that is, in fact, the end of Act 1. It ends Act 1 with a little bit of a whimper. And we're back in Act 2, getting to the Dramia II, and we go through this aurora, which has all these colors.
Radiation level, Mr. Sulu?
Intense, Captain.
Decidedly non-lethal, however.
And Kirk goes, good, so it's safe to beam down to Dramia II. Let's go. And I'm like, okay, you're in intense radiation that's non-lethal, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And then you're going to beam down to the planet where there was a plague with like no precautions at all?
Absolutely agree. This is another leap in logic, so to speak. And I think just another plot point that suffers from the truncated running time of an animated episode. Certain things you kind of go with. I mean, certainly the thing with the leaving the bay doors open just like is so obviously stupid. But this is another one, like, where are the precautions? I mean, absolutely, especially when you're talking about going through an area where everyone died of a plague. I mean, didn't you learn your lesson from like Miri and The Naked Time? I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, it seems like you should, and with Miri and The Naked Time, you didn't know there was a plague. Here you actually know ahead of time there was a plague.
Yep.
So we beam down, and the first thing Kirk says, which is really just an asshole thing to say, is he says,
Not the most enchanting place I've ever been to.
And I'm like, dude, there was a plague here where everyone died.
And the Dramian says, a plague seldom leap behind fields of flowers, Captain. Like, you idiot.
I mean, come on. How rude can you be to make a statement like that? And then what we see someone in the shadows. So there's survivors here or something, and they're kind of running away, and they chase after this person, and he disappears into a cave. And the music is killing me. Like, still.
Yep, I know. I get it. It's almost time. You're almost there, buddy. Hang.
I know, man.
4 episodes.
Well, what's so hard about it, particularly the is that's the whole thing, and they just repeat that piece. I mean, they repeat it like 50 times in a row.
They do. But I gotta say that one of the areas this episode actually is strong is the pacing. And as the episode progresses, you go from being like, oh, we've got to, clear McCoy's name. And then, just with all the backstory and all the information you're uncovering about the plague that infected the planet. But then, as we will see as the episode continues, that the stakes are increasing, and so is a race against time. And that is where Star Trek has always worked really, really well, when you increase the stakes while making it a true race against time. And that's where the episode actually does work.
So they go into this cave, they get attacked by one of the survivors. And what we find out is that basically these guys were off planet, and they came back to the planet after the plague was over, and then and all their family has died, and they've just been living here, in suffering to honor the dead, I guess, is sort of what's going on.
What sort of makes sense, yeah.
You see, Captain, there were no actual survivors.
You are wrong. There was a survivor.
And there we meet Koltai.
Koltai, of course, voiced by James Stewart.
Yep. Yeah. And then they ask him about McCoy, and he says, "Oh, the Earth Doctor, he saved my life.
He treated me for saurian virus. A man who saves does not also kill, Commander."
So what's hard is, like, there's no evidence of why they think McCoy is responsible for the plague. And this isn't particularly good evidence that he's not responsible for the plague. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So, but actually that's good for the story in terms of he's not, 100% exonerated yet. They still have to figure out, how to clear him. And McCoy himself is even like, I don't know, that's why he's like, he's fine with being tried.
But they treat it as if they have the witness that's going to prove McCoy's innocence. That's how they treat this whole thing.
Right. That's right. And
I don't see that this is. Nobody said that McCoy isn't a doctor who saved people's lives. He is.
So I see what you're saying. So just because he saved this one person's life doesn't mean that he's not also responsible for the plague.
Well, because we never hear why they think he's responsible for the plague. You know what I mean?
Right.
Did they collect any evidence? And if they did, why did it take them 19 years? It's all just really, really thin. So we're heading back to Dramia 1. We're going warp factor 6. Spock is taking care of this of Koltai because he's their big witness.
Let's hope the trial hasn't started.
Captain,
Yes, Mr. Spock, what is it?
the trial may be academic.
Academic?
Yes, Captain. Koltai is turning blue.
He's infected. And
Yep.
if he's infected, and then everyone on this ship is infected, and they've got a quarantine in place. This is an episode. I remember when we covered Miri,
Right.
when we first started doing this. I just remember how much it gained more urgency and relevancy because what we had just been through. Obviously, we all know what that is, and this is another one where every time I hear disease or quarantine, it's like this post-traumatic stress syndrome disorder of thinking back to just the pandemic.
And we say, okay, we're going to set up an immediate quarantine, except they don't really quarantine from him.
You see, Commander, we do place a value on life, all life. Does that shock you, Commander?
It is not that. It is...
Captain, you're blue.
And we see that Kirk has turned blue. Everyone on the bridge has turned blue, except Spock. Deimos has turned blue, and he goes down, and Kirk is collapsing, and with his last bit of energy says,
Mr. Spock, take command.
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty vital end of an act.
Totally.
That everyone on the Enterprise is infected. Spock is the only take command. Kirk's last command before he faints is take command. I think that's this is where the episode works.
And it's Act 3. Sulu is still at the helm and very groggily, explains that we're going to basically, if all of them die, they're going to blow up the ship to protect people from the disease.
General Order 6. The ship will self-destruct in 24 hours if everyone dies. I think this is the first time we're hearing General Order 6. We've heard General Order, 24 or 21, whatever it was in A Taste of Armageddon. And then TAS-4, stay away from TAS-4. But this is a new one.
And Kirk, still somewhat awake, basically says, we got to get McCoy, which makes sense. He's the doctor. He's the one who's going to, save us from the plague. And they call down to the planet and saying, hey, can you give us our doctor back? And they're like, so you say you got a witness that he's innocent, but he's sick. And you say Deimos witnessed this too, and that he can testify for the doctor, but he can't talk because he's sick. And now you're asking to just take the guy away. Yeah, we don't believe you, which I like.
Got to get McCoy.
If you'll permit me, Captain, I might be able to get McCoy.
At which point Kirk turns green, which is the next stage of the disease.
I can't infect the planet, Captain. and I can get McCoy.
I'm like, how do you know that you can't affect the planet?
Right. He might just be he might not be infected, but he might be a carrier.
Yeah. Well, it could
Right.
be that someone, that Kirk, drooled on his shoulder and there's the disease on his shoulder. Like it's not like he's been isolating these people. Again, it's just dumb.
And
But
also because in Miri, like remember when they were on the other Earth, and Spock says, "I am a carrier, and I do want to go back to the ship." So he knew
yeah,
that he's been in a situation before where he was not infected, but he knew he was a carrier.
there's so much we can pretend we know as much that will serve the story the way we want to do it, and we can pretend we don't know as much that will serve the story the way we want to do it, instead of really thinking through what do we know and what do we not know, and therefore what should our behavior be. But Spock does beam down. He does free the doctor, and McCoy argues with him. He's like, no, I have to stand trial. I have to find out.
Doctor, you will stand trial. You will find out. After you've found an antidote for the plague which is about to kill everyone aboard the Enterprise.
The one thing I really do like is Spock telling McCoy,
You realize, Doctor, if you go and fail to find an antidote, you too will die.
I'm a doctor, Spock. A doctor. Get us beamed aboard.
that's a great moment.
That's a great moment.
Yeah.
And there was almost a very TOS moment when, McCoy, he knows he has to find an antidote ASAP. And McCoy says, I'm a doctor, Spock, a doctor. And I was waiting for him to go, I'm a doctor, not a, moon shuttle conductor or whatever.
Right.
I felt like that was something that if Dorothy Fontana was still a part of the show, she would have totally put that in, because the door was open for him to, have a callback to one of his great moments that has become iconic with the original Star Trek, and it almost went there, close enough, I guess.
So he beams up. There is no information in the computer system that recognizes this disease, and McCoy's having trouble with his equipment.
My readings keep shifting. Must be the activity of that blasted Aurora.
Bones. That's it. Aurora. Changing. Color.
Jim.
And this is the thing that I know you love, that I love too, of them figuring out a problem together. They are definitely doing that. I don't think any of this makes sense, but they are doing it. Because he tells Spock, feed in the data without meeting the color change symptoms. And Spock does it and finds the disease, which still doesn't really make sense to me. Like,
I'm with you all the way on this. I love the moment when Kirk is like, Bones, that's it. Like when they work through a problem together, that's one of the signature moments of the original show that I've always loved. But everything that happens after that moment in this episode just doesn't make sense at all. I was watching going like, wait, what? How does this work? How does that work? It didn't satisfy me, their solution to all this.
Well, because what caused the disease? Did the Aurora cause the disease?
Right.
Because if the Aurora did cause the disease, then there is no other disease that is like this disease that doesn't have the colors. Do you know what I mean?
I agree completely. Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
They introduced the Aurora for a reason. And then, okay, yeah, so the Aurora is the catalyst for the disease, but it's just still doesn't make much sense, trying to make sense of it, trying to do retcon in my head about it. And it's just like, I always look for a reason to make things work, and I couldn't do it with this one.
Well, and then they go like the disease that they discovered that isn't the disease that has all the colors, but has the other systems, has no known cure. And it's like, okay, like, how is this all making sense? And then what we hear is that, but you treated Koltai, the guy who survived, for Saurian virus. And they're like, maybe the treatment for Saurian virus cures this disease. So they go around and they give everybody a shot. And by the way, it is an old-fashioned injection. It is not a hypo.
Oh, you're right. That's right. Uh-huh.
But we give everybody this shot, and Kirk turns back to the right color. Everyone else does. And then we are finishing up with a log where we talk about how now they're actually, instead of trying McCoy, they have a ceremony honoring him.
We of Dramia Wish to thank you, Doctor, for your discovery of the antidote which frees us from future attacks of the auroral plague.
They're going to forget about breaking McCoy out of jail. We're going to forget about the Demos stowing away on the Enterprise. We head back up and get the longest, dumbest shot for a joke. I mean,
And it
goes
doesn't
on.
work.
It doesn't. And it's just like Spock is giving McCoy crap about not dispensing his vitamin rations to the crew and, talks about Hippocrates would not approve of lame excuses.
Makes no sense. And also, look, maybe it was a blessing in disguise that the second season of the animated series only had 6 episodes because, you have nobody on the show now who really, really knows Star Trek, who's like can kind of keep it all in line. Like Rod Berry, he was not really involved with season 2. Fontana had moved on to something else. She was not involved with season 2. And when they first beam up and they're in the transporter room, for a quick second or two, you see that McCoy is wearing a gold shirt, and the braid on Scotty's arm is the braid of command, not that of a lieutenant commander. And of course, I'm going to pick up stuff like that. But the obvious thing about McCoy wearing the gold shirt, and it's a mistake, but you didn't have anybody to really like double check and dot the I's and cross the T's. Like you did if you had a true Star Trek veteran overseeing everything. And that's another area, just like with the Practical Joker, more so, but even this episode, while an improvement over the Practical Joker, is still flawed.
It's always been interesting to me how people view things through their own area of expertise. And obviously I'm really a story guy. Like that's really like character and story and plot points. That's kind of how my brain works. I'm not necessarily a cinematography guy. I'm not, I was on the set of the first movie that I wrote. And I remember the AD, we were talking about films and he said, "Oh, that was a terrible movie." 3 times in that movie, I saw tape on the ground because they left the marks where the actors were supposed to stand and the camera saw it. And so for him, that's totally unacceptable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that ruined the movie. And what's interesting to me is like, for me, things like you just described, the gold shirt, all those things, that's unacceptable. You know what I mean? Someone needs to catch that. It has nothing to do with story. You could have a great story and have an error like that, but that error just shouldn't happen. And then things like this last scene with Spock and McCoy, it's like somebody told them, "Hey, Spock and McCoy bicker," and we often have little bickering jokes at the end of the episode. And so they wrote one, but it doesn't fit the characters. It's not exactly how they bicker, and it feels very manufactured. And it's like, again, I go like, that's not acceptable,
I agree with you. I am with you. I feel the same way. Season 2 of the season, I mean, it's 6 episodes, but it just feels like, they knew they weren't going to go beyond season 2. I mean, it was the plan all along, which is to do 2 seasons. And, they were just kind of finishing it out, and Filmation was busy with a great number of other projects. Star Trek was one of the cogs in a very, very big wheel.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until later that the show would be appreciated because there were so many other elements that it actually did feel like Star Trek and work. But as of this moment, as of now, it's like, okay, we got a couple to go. Let's finish this baby out and move on.
After they have this bickering moment, Kirk laughs and he reaches up his hand to his face, and the animation is so terrible. It looks like his arm is disconnected, and which I'm sure is what is really happening. It's just someone, there's 2 different layers, and someone's just slid in the hand frame by frame, and they're doing a terrible job. It almost is disturbing how weird the hand looks coming up to his face at that moment.
I agree. And, so much of the animation, I just chalked it up to, well, it's Filmation. That's what Filmation was. But, and other people have definitely criticized the animation of the original series as not being very good. But at that moment in particular, I go, yeah, that doesn't look good at all. So I agree with that.
This guy who I know I mentioned before, Mike Hoover, who I did the shark documentaries with and some other stuff with, he had an expression which he called coyote, which is, the coyote that would chew its own leg off to get out of the trap. Yep. He says there's a certain point in every production where you're starting to go coyote, where you're just like, I just got to get out of this show, and it's like senioritis, whatever it is like, I am so sick of doing this thing. Let's just get it done and move on. And of course, what what Hoover said is that you have to fight that, because that's where you're really going to mess up the show. That's when your, final moments is when you have to be your best, not your worst. But yeah, I think you could really see that they have gone, in Hoover's words, coyote at this point.
Yeah, exactly. But having said that, I do think that Albatross works better than its predecessor. It's a little
I
bit
agree.
of a return to form for animated series, that form being, we got a couple more to go. But, there are moments when I felt like this would have made great live action episode. There are moments where I was reminded of, particularly of like Wolf in the Fold. But then again, there are just very, very weak plot points that absolutely make no sense. But I got to say that even for an animated show that's airing on Saturday mornings, to deal with like, a virus and, people dying, I mean, that's pretty heavy stuff for a Saturday morning cartoon. So once again, I feel like while The Practical Joker did speak down to its audience, Albatross was an episode where the audience had to kind of rise to its level, whatever that level is, but it's definitely a few bars above Practical Joker.
So that is what we think of the Albatross. Oh, wait, one more. Why is this called the Albatross?
That's a great question. I don't know.
I mean, it's a big bird that flies around near down at near Antarctica, and there's the expression an albatross around someone's neck, which is maybe that's what they're saying. Like this is an albatross around McCoy's neck. I don't understand why it's called the Albatross.
That's a really good point. I really don't know why it's called Albatross, but if anyone listening knows like why this episode is even called Albatross and what that has to do with the story that's happening, please let us know. Go to our Facebook page, Enterprise Incidents on Facebook, and comment below our reveal of this episode, and let us know why you think Albatross applies to the story that we are featuring right now.
And you could also reach us on Twitter at Enterprise Incidents on Instagram. You can subscribe to the show at all the usual places, and we would love both your subscription and your review on Apple Podcasts. You can do that, or on Spotify. Comments on YouTube are always great, and you could support the show by going to clicking on the link in the show notes, where you will take you to Spotify for podcasters. You can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month, as much as $9.99 a month. We definitely appreciate your support. And if you want to reach me, you can reach me at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. And we are deep in the middle of World War II on the Cinephiles, having just finished 2 parts on The Great Escape. We're now doing at least 2 parts on The Bridge on the River Kwai, which is an absolutely incredible film. Scott, how would people reach you?
You can reach me on Twitter and Instagram at Movie Mance, and make sure that you go to our Facebook page and follow us on Facebook. And like Steve said, we really do appreciate those reviews, and they help us get seen if we get enough reviews. So go to our Apple Podcast page and please leave a review if you have not done so. Maybe you've been meaning to do so, but you get sidetracked and now the episode's over. You're going to go on to your next podcast to listen to, whatever you're doing next. But before you do so, head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. And of course, like Steve mentioned, please support us. Think of it as a tip jar, and we greatly, greatly appreciate it. We now have just 2 episodes left to go during our deep dive of the animated series. And up next is the animated series episode that won Star Trek its Emmy for Outstanding Entertainment Children's Series, something even the original series could not do. The next episode is How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth. Until then, keep going boldly.